morning, John.
Morning, Sherry.
You've been part of a board of directors, at least one or two, and also have led boards. And, this morning we'd like to tap a little bit of your experience about what it's like to have a meeting when not everyone can show up. Certainly there are some pros and cons to carrying on. I'd like to hear a little bit about what you've experienced, what you found has worked well, what items of discussion can be handled or carried forward when not everyone can be there, or when the better wisdom has been to just decide to scuttle the meeting and reconnoiter when everyone can join. So would love to hear some of your perspectives on that, John.
Thank you. I'll do my best. It seems to me in the first place that what we need to decide is the meeting quorate. If it's not quorate, then that's a wonderful excuse for abandoning the meeting. However, it doesn't preclude lots of discussion and exploration of issues that are on the agenda. So I wouldn't waste an opportunity. You've got a few people together. You may have to park decisions to a later meeting, but there's nothing to stop you airing and sharing whilst you are together. Secondly, sorry, Sherry?
No, go ahead. Go ahead with your thought.
So secondly, I guess it depends on the significance of the agenda items. Are they vital to the future of the board's work? Or are they relatively, relatively trivial? Maybe some maintenance stuff, but not hugely challenging or hugely exploratory. So then I'd be asking myself, who have we got there? Who's here? Have we got the best people in the room, given that you can't argue that everyone is the best people? So have we got the best people in the room for this agenda, for this opportunity? And if we have, then we can, of course, proceed, always being mindful of the fact that not everyone is in the room. I think it's about respect for absent colleagues. It's about being mindful that you will at next meeting probably have to account to the absentees for why you have made the decision you have made. And I think that's perfectly proper. Now, if the people in the room, in your view, if you're chairing the meeting, in your view, may not be best placed to contribute to the decision, it may not be their areas of expertise or wisdom, then I think you have to make a very deliberate decision about whether we think we would be able to make a better decision when we have the rest of the board present, or most of the board present. And that's always a nuisance, because it means that everyone's convened. Those who have convened have not done so for any useful purpose. It means that maybe my judgment as chair is at fault, but had I known these people were going to be absent, maybe I should have suggested rearranging the meeting date or time rather than have everyone convene. Nevertheless, I think it doesn't matter who is in the room and who isn't in the room. You always have to be mindful of those who are not there. What would they have said? What would they have thought? The extraordinary advantage of a number of absentees is that you're more likely to be able to get your own way. So it's a great opportunity if you are not what might be termed a particularly ethical operator. You can charge things through, knowing that the chances of being challenged are far less than might be the case if everyone was present. That's not a behaviour I approve of, and if I see that going on, whether I'm chairing the meeting or just attending the meeting, I would do my best to deflect that and divert that, because I do kind of like the idea of an ethical board, and the numbers should not affect that ethicity, if there is such a word as ethicity. So I think those are the major things that occur to me, Sherry, about the convenience or otherwise of people being absent, the wisdom or otherwise of the board's decision, because not everyone is there. And whilst people will say, well, surely don't you aim to have a quoracy that is the smallest number possible so you can still have the meeting? That, in my view, is a tick box mentality, because surely if you've got everyone appointed to your board, it's because you want them to be there, not because you want them to be absent. And whilst I accept not everyone can be there every time, most of them should be. So you might want to think about whether your numbers for a quorate meeting are set too low, which makes it easy for people to be absent. Oh, it doesn't matter if I don't go because they can still make decisions, which is not a very encouraging way to do things.
So I'd like to follow up on a couple of things.
Yeah.
And the first one is the importance of communicating to those who are absent.
Mm-hmm.
And also Robert raises the issue of whether or not it's important to consider what their points of view might be when they're not there. Do the participants try to speak for the absent members, or is it just more important to communicate with them following the meeting or at the next meeting?
Yeah, good points. Firstly, did the absentee raise any questions, perhaps with you if you're the chair or one of your colleagues, to raise during the meeting on their behalf? So that's one possibility. Fred has asked about this. The extent to which you can reasonably speak for an absent member, I guess, is a bit variable. It's kind of a good idea if you say to Josephine, what do you think Fred would have said in these circumstances? It puts Josephine on the spot, and it may well be that Josephine doesn't know Fred very well and doesn't know what he would think. So there's a bit of risk associated with that. But I think, nevertheless, the fact that in the room is a finite amount of wisdom doesn't stop you adding to that wisdom through speculation, through the absentee chipping something in beforehand, which you've all been able to access because they've said, would you please ask this question on my behalf?
That's another good point, John, is that if you know in advance that people won't be there, you can certainly solicit their input prior to the meeting. So one of the other things that Robert raises in the chat is when deciding an issue, I'm sure it's all contextual, it depends on what you're talking about, but ultimately I would suppose that the chair would be the person who decides that the right people are in the room to discuss a particular issue, or would it be the larger group deciding whether or not they feel they have appropriate representation to go ahead?
Again, speaking as a chair, I have deferred discussion or decisions on certain items that I think the full board should be present, especially if it's a very thin attendance at the time. So be prepared to do so. I think the question of if it's a time-sensitive issue, we've got to decide. I'd always ask myself, do I think the board is being bounced into something? Which is not about the numbers present so much as about the time sensitivity. Is it because if it's something that we may have discussed previously, that would be helpful. But if it's something that's suddenly come out of left field, why has it suddenly come out of left field? Or someone hoping there wouldn't be many people there so that the decision could be crowded through, so to speak.
Mm.
I'm just a bit suspicious at times when these things happen. So if the supplier has to wait, well, whoever made the decision that we are buying this thing needs to square that with the supplier. I accept that the person doing so may not be in any sense responsible for the poor attendance at the meeting, but it would be, I think, quite improper to make a questionable decision, particularly if it's a large amount of money, for example, without the view of the majority of the board, and by the majority, I mean nearly everybody. But I think it's a decision, I agree with Robert's question, it's a decision to proceed, a question for the chair to rule on. I think it probably is, but on the other hand, no one is exempt from making that suggestion. It's not the chair's right, it's every member of the board has a responsibility for making sure the meeting is well conducted. If you've ever left a meeting wishing you'd never attended and saying how you would never have allowed this or that to happen, ask yourself what part you played in that. Did your silence contribute to that poor meeting? And I find being a chair quite difficult, and support from around the table, from around the room, can be very helpful. Someone may think of something that we should have considered that actually we hadn't up to that point, or someone may think, maybe Chairman, we should wait until so and so is here because they have a particular experience which I think would be valuable. Great, wish I'd thought of that. How does everyone feel about us delaying that until Fred, Jim, Bill, Harry, Harriet, Georgina can be present? That makes sense. I hope it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's always difficult for a chair is to play the role of facilitator when really what you want to do is participate and help move things along. And sometimes it's difficult to achieve that balance when you're on the spot, and to remove your own bias about what you believe ought to be the right thing to happen is very, very difficult. And it really is quite useful for people to interject if they believe something is being moved along before it's had proper deliberation and proper participation. So absolutely.
And of course that leads you then to the risk of the meeting running longer than people would expect. Because more time is being spent on something than was perhaps intended. But it's not about time, it's about the quality of the decision making. And if it needs more time, it should have more time. People who feel railroaded, ignored, marginalised, don't really want to be at your meeting. And of course, you're not getting the best out of them when you do that.
That's right. So I'm not sure what Robert is leading to here with this question about potentially being Machiavellian because someone isn't there and proceeding without them is considered the right thing to do. I'm not sure what he's leading to there, but
well, Machiavelli wrote a lot of sense. And if Machiavellian is being practical to achieve an outcome, that's fine. If it's about being unethical, it's not fine. But you can use Machiavelli's writings for good or for evil. So I wouldn't be too concerned about trying to take advantage of a particular person's absence if I was reasonably confident that what we decided was kind of immaterial to them, or that they were particularly in favour of something that we decided should go ahead. But deliberately using their absence as a means of shifting a decision that would otherwise still be on the table, I think is a very political, unhelpfully political way, because then the likelihood is that you'll be playing ping pong with that individual for time immemorial, because people don't and shouldn't forgive you for taking advantage in that way. I may be a little old-fashioned when I say that, or maybe I'm not old-fashioned enough, but I do find having a principled set of principles to be quite helpful in these circumstances.
So that's a great tie into Robert's question about should the board have a policy.
Yes, yes. But you need the Machiavelli police present, Robert, to know whether it's a good Machiavellian decision or a bad one.
So I guess to wrap up the segment, John, it's situational with these decisions, and certainly you need to apply some common sense and be ethical about it. Although a lot of people would argue sense is not necessarily common, but certainly to understand, I think, first of all, the makeup of the board is an important concept for the chair, and knowing what is vital to continue the board's work, and being respectful and mindful of communicating to the rest of the board if you do decide to proceed, and also to avoid the situation of making a decision on the fly, perhaps to consider having some sort of policies, principles that you've determined in advance and written down.
Yeah, good idea.
Anything else you would add to summarize what we've been talking about?
I just lost one of my fellow trustees because his own business was becoming too demanding of his time. And this whole question of quoracy and how many meetings hasn't he attended raises its head, excuse me, in a number of senses, but predominantly it's not good for the long-term continuity of the board to have someone who is absent more than not. Most boards, I think, would probably have some kind of rule that says if you haven't attended more than 3 meetings in a year or something like that, you should resign, or you could be asked to leave. I think circumstances are always need to be considered. People might require a leave of absence for 3 or 4 meetings because of circumstances, but it doesn't mean that they suddenly become unsuitable or should be uninformed about what's going on in their absence. I do like it when people read minutes and agendas, even though they're not coming to meetings. But the sustainability of your board is in large part influenced by the presence of its trustees or its directors. It's not the absence of those directors. And the risk, I think, is always it becomes 1 or 2 people's little pet project where they can commit all kinds of sins. I've seen it happen over and over again where people can pursue a minority item because they managed to arrange it so that those who would not be in favour didn't happen to be in the room at the time. Very dishonest, I think, very dishonest. Not a way, would you want to buy a used car from that person? No, I wouldn't. Would you want a person like that to perform surgery on you? No, I wouldn't. So what are they doing on the board in the first place? If at all possible, get rid of them.
Right. Well, thanks so much for this, John, and to everyone out there, thank you for watching and listening. And this has been a conversation with John Bruce, who has acted as a chair in several situations with both large boards and smaller boards, and it's been great to hear your perspectives and your wisdom, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sherry.